Hello. I know I'm a bit late on this, but recently there was a debate between a few socialists, the Finnish Bolshevik Bad Mouse Productions and Xizizi, sorry if I mispronounced that, and a few capitalists, Sargon, Academic Agent, and Bantu. One of the arguments of the capitalist side was that capitalism is lifting millions out of poverty. This is, and to use the scientific term, absolute bullshit. Either the capitalist side was ignorant or they were dishonest. Either way, it doesn't reflect particularly well on them. Let's get to why it was nonsense, shall we? The story goes, according to the World Bank, the governments of wealthy countries, and the UN, that the world is getting better and better, and it's all thanks to capitalism and Western aid. They color their speeches with cozy words and nice-sounding rhetoric, but it's just that, rhetoric. Poverty worldwide has not been decreasing, and in fact, evidence shows that it's been actually increasing. So let's take a closer look. First of all, the definition of poverty has been changed in a way that serves this poverty reduction narrative. The threshold of poverty, which is the poverty line, is normally calculated by each nation for itself, and it's supposed to represent what an adult needs to get by in every respective nation. In 1990, Martin Ravellian, an Australian economist at the World Bank, noticed that the poverty lines of a group of the world's poorest countries clustered around $1 per day. On Ravellian's recommendation, the World Bank adopted this as the first ever international poverty line. Using this threshold, the World Bank announced in its annual report in the year 2000 that the absolute number of those living on $1 per day or less continues to increase. The worldwide total rose from 1.2 billion in 1987 to 1.5 billion today, and if recent trends persist, will reach 1.9 billion by 2015. Just as soon as this horrific news came out, they flip-flopped on their position and said this: while poverty has been increasing steadily for some 2 centuries, the introduction of free market policies has actually reduced the number of impoverished people by 400 million between 1981 and 2001. Wow, how ideologically convenient. This news story was possible because the bank shifted the international poverty line from its original $1.02 at 1985 purchasing power parity to $1.08 at 1993 PPP. Which, given inflation, was lower in real terms. With this tiny change, this flick of someone's wrist, the world was magically better and millions rose out of poverty. The international poverty line changed again in 2008 to $1.25, and the world again magically improved overnight. The $1.08 international poverty line made it look like the poverty headcount had been reduced by 316 million people from 1990 to 2005. But the new international poverty line, even lower than the last in real terms because of inflation, increased this number to 437 million people, creating the illusion that an additional 121 million people have been saved from poverty. The biggest problem with all this is that the $1-a-day international poverty line is based on the national poverty lines of the 15 poorest countries in the world. These lines give a very poor foundation since many are set by bureaucrats with very little data, and more importantly, they tell us nothing about what poverty is like in wealthier countries. I don't mean just like the United States and Great Britain and so on and so forth. I mean relatively wealthier countries like Sri Lanka, for example. In Sri Lanka, a 1990 survey found that 35% of the population fell under the national poverty line, but the World Bank, using their own international poverty line, reported only 4% in the same year. In other words, the international poverty line makes poverty seem much less serious than it actually is. The current international poverty line reflects what $1.25 could buy in the United States in 2005. But anyone who lives in the US knows that it's impossible to survive on this $1.25. In fact, the US government itself calculated that in 2005, the average person needed at least $4.50 per day just to meet minimum nutritional requirements. The same thing goes for many other countries, where $1 a day is simply not enough for human existence. In India, for example, children living just above the international poverty line still have a 60% chance of being malnourished. How can this ever be considered as lifting people out of poverty? According to Peter Edwards of Newcastle University, if people are to achieve a normal life expectancy, they need double the current IPL, or a minimum of $2.50 per day. But if this higher standard would be adopted, it would seriously make the World Bank look bad. If we were to use it, then the poverty headcount rises above 3.1 billion, almost triple what the World Bank claims. It also shows that poverty is getting worse, not better, with nearly 353 million more people impoverished today than in 1981. With China taken out of this equation totally, the number shoots up from 353 million to 852 million. Some economists even go further and advocate an international poverty line of $5 or even $10, which is the upper boundary suggested by the World Bank. At this level, at this standard, we see that some 5.1 billion people, nearly 80% of the world's population, would be living in poverty or are living in poverty as of 2014. This number has only risen since then. There is evidence to show that pretty much any improvement has happened in China and only in China, with other regions in the world either staying as poor as they were 30 years ago or getting much, much worse. The $1.25 threshold is ridiculously low, but it remains in favor because it is the only baseline that shows any progress in the fight against poverty, and therefore justifies the horrific economic deals developing countries are being given. Every other line tells us the opposite story. In fact, even the $1.25 line shows that. Without factoring China, the poverty headcount is worsening, with 108 million people added to the ranks of the poor since 1981. Then again, why are we listening to an institution called the World Bank, whose concern is profit and only profit, on what poverty is like in the world? Why would they ever tell the truth? And why would Sargon and the like believe this? I really don't know. Maybe it's just
ideology, 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 ideology.